Welcome into episode 449 of the Skate Podcast. I am Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridgette Proulx and Scott McLaughlin. Bridgette and Scott, new Boston Bruins head coach Marco Sturm was introduced to fans and media at his press conference yesterday, along with Don Sweeney next to him. And there's a lot to take away from that availability. And so let's just get right into it with our opening shifts. And Bridgette, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so Scott and I were there. Both had a chance to ask a question. It was a good, introductory 45 minutes. I think it was about how long the press conference went. So there was a lot of topics covered, but one topic that kept coming up and that I think is really important and I'm interested in, so this is why it's my opening shift, is player development. It was brought up in Don Sweeney's opening statement. It was asked about by media members, and it's going to be important because and Don Sweeney brought up these names in particular, Matt Patra and Fraser Mitten, as guys that when the conversation started coming up, like wanting to see those guys take their next step in their NHL career in terms of development. And Marco Sturm's background in being an AHL coach, developing those guys. And someone asked him what his style was of, are you the kind of person who benches a young guy after a mistake, or are you the kind of person who lets them play through it and like coaches them hard through it? And so it seems like he's more of the latter in terms of his approach to younger players. And so I'll be interested to see. I wanted to ask him, but I didn't have time, what he thought of some of the younger guys that he's going to be working with, like Mason Lohrei and those two, as well as maybe Fabian Lysell. Like, I'm not sure how much of his research and homework on the Bruins when he was interviewing had to do with prospects, but I'm sure some of it was related there. And I'm sure he has looked at these guys on film and has thoughts on them. So I'm really interested to see, his contributions to player development, though there's so many other things that he's going to need to do. That's one that he's getting the roster he gets, right? Not going to have a whole lot of say in it. But there are those things that he can do during the season, like help guys take the next step forward in their careers, that could make a difference for them this season.
Yeah, he did actually touch on a couple of those guys, Mason Lohrei especially. Later in the day, Tuesday, he went on Felger and Maz, and we don't want to promote them too much because they are the other station, but it'll be worth touching on some of that as well, I think, as we go on today. There's a lot to get to on the player development side. You're right, that was a key theme. My opening shift is about Sturm's coaching staff, because we got a Boston Globe story in the morning that strongly inferred that Jay Leach, Chris Kelly, and Bob Essenza would all be back. Don Sweeney confirmed that during the press conference. So that is 3/4 of Sturm's assistant coaching staff. There is one spot remaining, and Sturm and Sweeney both said they are in the process of making a hire to fill that spot. It'll be done well before training camp. And Sweeney at first didn't seem to not want to say like what the new assistant coach's specialty would be or his area of focus. But Sturm did. Sturm said they wanted to be someone who has some power play experience, which I think is probably what a lot of people wanted to hear. I know it's what I've been pushing for. I think the staff needs a power play specialist, and it sounds like that is what they are looking for, which would mean Chris Kelly is probably off power play duties, which I think is also probably welcome news for a lot of fans, because not that the power plays issues last year were all on Chris Kelly. Jim Montgomery was involved early in the year. Joe Sacco was involved after he took over. And obviously a lot of blame has to go on the players as well, but pretty clear that Chris Kelly did not have answers for the struggling power play last season. They did not really seem to make any meaningful changes to improve. So I think fresh eyes and a fresh voice will be needed there, regardless of what the personnel is, and we may not even know all the personnel just yet, depending on what they do this offseason. But Sturm has some power play experience himself, some mixed results, which we can get into. But I think if they do identify, that kind of specialist who has run a power play, who's had success, who's going to bring some new ideas, that would be an important addition to the staff. And it seems like that's what they're working towards.
Yeah, and we had talked about prior to Sturm even being hired officially, but we talked about regardless of who was hired, that they have the jurisdiction to implement their own staff underneath them because there's a lot of accountability and responsibility for the assistant coaching staff. And to have a coaching staff kind of forced upon you as a new hire, it isn't ideal. Now, we talked about just how poor the power play was. I saw the article in the Globe before the press conference, and I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask why, after having one of the worst power plays in recent franchise history, and certainly in the league last year, that Chris Kelly is still on staff, unless, and I even wrote this, unless he's getting revoked of his power play responsibilities, and it does appear that that is the case. So Chris Kelly was a great defensive forward. He was a great penalty killer. If his intelligence is going to that aspect of the game because their PK also struggled last year, then okay. And so it's not a black and white world we live in. So there's that. My biggest takeaway yesterday has to do with the draft, which is at the end of this month, and a lot of takeaways. But Don Sweeney was making comments about how much draft capital that they have, and just they have options. And essentially, and we'll get into it later in the episode, and Bridge is going to read the full quote, but the Bruins may very well end up selecting number 7 overall in the draft this year. But I think there's other possibilities out there as well that Don Sweeney did not close the door on. And that includes this year's first year draft pick. It could, or first round draft pick. It could be subsequent years draft picks that the Bruins may try to use to get better sooner than later. So interesting comments. I'll reserve that quote for later, and we'll get into all that as well. But definitely a lot to take away from yesterday.
Yeah, I guess like bigger, just kind of more general question to get into it, because I feel like some of the reaction to Sturm's press conference was almost like how he presented it himself. And he starts kind of with cracking joke about, like, he says like, good morning, good afternoon. I don't even know what's going on. And people, listen, Jones and Keefe, okay, we can name them, like latched onto that as like, shouldn't he have had like a better star? Like, and I was like, come on, like really? So I guess what I want to bring up is like, did you guys think at all that he didn't come across well? Or I guess just in general, like, how did you feel about the way Sturm presented himself and came across in his first media setting?
Nothing about what he said rubbed me the wrong way. When I was texting one of my friends after, so I have a friend who actually, she was the color commentator for the Ontario Reign this past season, which is where he coached last year. And so she has a relationship with him. She says he's a great guy. Like, she said he's a great coach as well. She had nothing but positive things to say about him and her experience with working with him. But she was texting me, how did it go? And I texted her back, it was uneventful, which is a good thing, because I don't really think he said anything that could be taken in a bad way. Like, nothing about what he said rubbed me the wrong way. I think he seemed to grasp what the challenges were, but still be optimistic, which is obviously, you're not going to, if he came in and said, oh yeah, our roster is crap, I don't know what to do, like, that's not what he was ever going to say. And yeah, I saw a lot of negative feedback, which I was honestly surprised by how negative it was. And it's pretty clear that the results are going to have to be what sways people. But I don't think he said anything that was out of the ordinary. Like, people joke. I personally, if I'm nervous, I make a joke right in the beginning, you know, like that's just what that was. And also I often don't know what time or what day it is. So it was relatable.
What did he
It wasn't like a mean or I don't know. Nothing about what he said rubbed me the wrong way. Nothing about his background makes me think he's going to fail. Like just like that's the only option. Like we just still don't know. There's so and I would think that the fan base would want to be open-minded about the season potentially going well.
Scott, what did he say? What was the first
Unfortunately,
thing he said again?
we live in Boston, Bridgette, so
No.
that's not going to happen. So after after Sweeney's comments welcoming up to the stage, they take the photo with the jersey and all that, and
Yeah.
then Sturm sat down to give his opening statement, and he goes, "Good morning" or "Good afternoon." I don't even know what's going on, and then got into his statement
Yeah.
as if
Yeah.
you didn't know what time of day it was, type of thing, and
Yeah.
Well, because it was almost
it's
noon,
11
right?
o'clock. Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
in that middle area, late morning.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like
He was nervous.
that's a stretch.
To
Yeah.
be honest
would-
with you, it's probably a reach because there was nothing controversial to talk about in that from that press conference.
He was a little nervous to start. He's a hockey coach, not a public speaker. Though I think he's a great speaker especially for English not being his native language. I think he obviously came across a little nervous right there, right? But I think that overall he came across to me as somebody who is direct, confident in his abilities, and transparent. Like I think that I enjoyed everything he had to say. I was a little bit not annoyed, but I rolled my eyes a little bit when like I said, when I read the article in the Globe that the entire head coach or the entire coaching staff is coming back, and that the only void that they have to replace is the one that they never ended up replacing of Joe Sacco when he went from assistant coach to interim head coach last year. And I said to myself, well, of course, the staff is remaining, but that's not on Sturm. And also, when I realized that it does appear that Kelly is going to get his power play coaching responsibilities revoked, I was like, okay, so they're just going to reassign him and bring in a power play guy. So it is what it is. But as far as Sturm goes, I enjoyed everything he had to say. I think that I think he's I think you have to look at his entire day as well. Scott mentioned that the radio appearance he made later in the afternoon, where he sat down for 25 minutes in person and answered some pretty blunt, straight up questions. And I thought he handled himself really well there, to be honest with you guys. And I'm rooting for him. I think he's going to be a great coach, and I think that he brings a little bit of everything. I think he brings relatability to the younger players that exist in the world today. I think he is not too far removed from playing himself. He retired, I think, a decade ago, and I just think he's a good hockey mind. And I think he also has while adhering to the youth of today, I also think he's going to bridge that with a no nonsense personality as well. And I absolutely loved when he was asked about the culture that he helped set 20 years ago, and what ignites that. And he talked about it starts in practice. I loved hearing that. When the Bruins were practicing under the leadership of Zdeno Chara, those teams, you can picture them now in the confines of beautiful Rastusha Arena in Wilmington, Massachusetts. They were always practicing hard. They practiced like they played, and I cannot say that is what I've witnessed in my experience at Warrior the last little while here. And I think that is exactly what I wanted to hear, and that's exactly right. You have to build the culture in practice. You have to play against your teammates like they're your opponents. You don't want to drill them through the boards on a forechecking drill, obviously, but there's a fine line between being very competitive in practice and helping each other get better, and acting like it's Game 7 of the finals, obviously. So I really enjoyed hearing that, and that is something I look forward to watching come to fruition.
Yeah, I thought a lot about the Patriots when he was talking about that, and when you were just talking about it, because we're seeing like the exact same thing happen with the Patriots right now, where reporters were just down at mandatory minicamp the last couple days this week and have been talking about how a Mike Vrabel practice is like so fast paced and structured and like clear. Like guys finish one drill and they know exactly where they're going next. And like everyone's always doing something and there's just not a lot of downtime. And it's like a kind of quick, but like just well structured practice. And reporters have been comparing it to, well, last year, like when they first got to practices under Gerard Mayo, there was like all this downtime, and it was like one group would be doing something, and another group would kind of just be standing off to the side doing nothing. And it didn't seem like there was a lot of structure. It didn't seem like there was something for everyone to be doing all the time. And I'm like, yeah, that like obviously it's not as extreme in hockey. You know, you are always doing something, but it did kind of remind me of like when we talked about in real time about how training camp last year was like doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot of pace to this. And like, of course, then we continue to hear about that finally from Montgomery and from Sweeney, where they acknowledged that this training camp wasn't what they had hoped it was. And so, yeah, I think that good practice habits can go a long way. And, you know, it's also funny you mentioned Rastusha. I was thinking like Marco Sturm's mind must have been blown, like coming back and seeing the facilities that they have now. Not just over at Warrior, but then yes, so we were actually in a building we've never been in as media yesterday. We were in the Bruins front offices, which are in the Verizon Tower that's now adjacent to and rises above TD Garden. And man, that building is nice. And their views are nice from where their offices are located, overseeing like the entire city. And I was like,
yeah, you can see like Old North Church, and like you can see like I don't know, you can see a bunch of different stuff from up there. Unfortunately, it was a foggy, gross day yesterday, but yeah. By the way, there are things that are too high tech in there. The elevators don't have buttons on the inside that like tell you what floor you're going to. I got in the elevator with a guy and I look at and there's no buttons and I go, well, I hope this is going to 8. And he's just like, yeah, it is. And I'm like, there's no way for me to know. So I
So
had no idea.
they're out of the Garden. Sweeney, Neely, their offices are not at the Garden anymore.
It's connected. I guess you can get to it from inside the Garden
Yeah.
if you could. Like I accidentally went to our old security and the guy was like, I could let you in this way, but it's actually probably easier for you to just go through the front. But anyway, yeah, there was to Sturm's demeanor and certainly you could infer from what he was saying that practices and training camp will not be lax. And there was a few other things that he said that give you the idea that he's going to be, he's going to be direct, like you said, Brian. And one of the quotes I had tweeted out yesterday was him saying, I'm very clear, I would say, the meetings I have, the messages that I'm going to deliver, there will be no gray area. I'm going to push those guys forward. I hate losing. I'm competitive. It sounds like, though he's good with younger players, the strategy is going to be, when you say there's no gray area, that's like if I tell you to do something and you're not doing it, you're going to hear about it. So I got the sense that he was going to kind of be like Vrabel, like you're saying, and make sure everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. And hopefully if they're doing it right, he doesn't have to jump in and re-deliver the message. But that seems like what his coaching style is. And I think it's what they need, honestly.
Yeah, and he talked when he was talking about setting that culture and it's starting in practice. He talked about how if you're a young player and you come up, that is going to be expected of you because the players that have been there, the leadership that's there, are leading by example and they're demanding it out of you. And that speaks to what Sturm and the Bruins are going to be expecting of Charlie McAvoy and David Pastrnak and Nikita Zadorov and Elias Lindholm and Hampus Lindholm. Like, it has to start with those players. And if McAvoy and Pastrnak and Zadorov and Lindholm, if they historically have just been a product of what is a newer age world where practices are more like glorified morning skates, then they're going to have to adapt and change. Now, McAvoy and Pasternak in particular, they played with Chara and Bergeron and Marchand. So it's not like they haven't practiced hard or don't know what that entails, but they're going to be relied upon to instill that. And these are conversations that Sturm, I believe, has or will be having with the leadership group and his core players. And even in their postseason breakup availabilities, McAvoy and Pasternak, they talked about getting together over the summer with the lead. It just, they know that they have to improve, and the improvements aren't just on game night between the hours of 7 and 9:30. It's all the time, and it's how they prepare, it's how they practice, and ultimately how they play on game night. So yeah, I think the other thing that Stern mentioned is it's not just him. It's not any one player. It's everybody, and that's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. No successful business, company, sports team, anything, you don't succeed without everybody pulling on the rope. So, that's going to be important.
I'd like to read the quote about leadership, if I can, about talking about the Bruins leadership that exists, because he did have an answer about that, and he said, "For me, it's so important that the core guys have got a lead. I already talked to a bunch of the guys, all my veterans on the current team. I can tell right away they learned from Bergeron, they learned from Chara, because they already have it in them." And so it sounds like he's done, first of all, like groundwork on getting to know his players, talking to those guys, what they want, and learning about their character, their personality, and being happy with how much guys like Bergeron and Chara have rubbed off on a McAvoy and a Pasternak and others.
Yeah, and obviously, there's been a lot of turnover here, so it's not a ton of guys left who play with them, but your two most important guys, Pasternak and McAvoy, obviously did. So yeah, like as we've said, the Bruins are going to be leaning heavily on those guys to set the tone. They're your two stars. They're your two highest paid players. They're going to be wearing letters. Like how they approach this season that's going to be how the Bruins approach the season. Like you hope they come in determined, ready to work from day one of training camp, all in, on the same page with Sturm, delivering the same message to their teammates, and ready to go and ready to maximize whatever this roster is, getting the most out of it. Obviously the flip side, the bad side of this would be that they come in and they're not totally ready to go, or they're not fully on board with Sturm, or whatever it might be, that they're not ready to lead. And then that bleeds through and you end up with more disorganization and disconnect and not bringing it every day and not practicing the right way and not developing the right habits. So yeah, it's critical for Sturm to get those two specifically, but yes, obviously the two Lindholms and Zadorov and Swayman and the rest of the core that's left here, got to get all of them on board. But it really does start there. And so, yeah, it seems like he's already touched base, and what Sturm shared was encouraging feedback. So if you're the Bruins, you hope that continues.
And Sturm, sorry, Bridget, go ahead. No, all you.
I was going to just say this could transition into the player development side of things, because he had an answer about how the older guys are going to be important in teaching the younger guys. But Brian, if you had something else first. So the answer, he was asked about like how to incorporate young players, and he said they got to see it in practice every day. For example, they got to see how guys practice the young guys can follow. Sorry, this is grammatically very difficult. There shouldn't be any excuses. Basically, he's saying the older guys are he says, I feel like they're going to learn from our core group, from our older guys, and basically they need to set the tone in practice to help let the younger guys know, what the culture is and what is expected and what is not acceptable.
And somebody also asked about the integration of young players and the ability to allow them to make mistakes at the NHL level without having immediate repercussions of going down to Providence, or that was the insinuation. And Sturm said, we all make mistakes, young and old, but you have to be responsible, which is, again, nobody that is saying, oh, let the kids play and make mistakes isn't acknowledging that they have to be somewhat responsible as well. You can't just be a complete liability out there. Now, and if you are, there's going to be heavy criticism, like Mason Lohrei, for example. I mean, he had the worst plus minus in the league last year. Some of it's circumstantial, playing matchups he shouldn't have been playing, team that sold there's all sorts of reasons, but the facts are what they are. And so he needs to be better. Marco Sturm talked about him. Sturm talked about Casey Middlestat again later in the day in a different forum, but he talked about Casey Middlestat needing to work with him and that they need him to be better. And he also talked about how he spoke with Jeremy Swayman, and he acknowledged he told the listenership what we've all been surmising all along, which is that he got off to missing training camp screwed him up. And there's fault to go around on the player and the player's camp and the Bruins as well for how last summer turned into such a circus. But he talked to Swayman, and it seems like he's feeling much better after Worlds, and that he knows how talented he is, and that a full off season, a full training camp will do him wonders, and that he needs to be better. So yeah, Sturm he's all over the ailments of this roster and knowing who needs to be better and what the team has to do to be better, while also acknowledging that the roster is going to be looking different come October. But it makes me come back to a question, Scott, I believe you asked this, and I would like you to elaborate on what the response was. But I think you talked about just the need to improve offensively and special teams and whatnot. But Sturm, because I want to quickly get into some of the philosophical, systemic things that Sturm did mention. He didn't give us his whole playbook, but he did talk about how he wants the Bruins to improve and vaguely talked about it. Scott, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I'd mentioned on here that I wanted to ask this question regardless, but it kind of became even more important because Don Sweeney, the term evolve offensively, this might as well be like the Bruins motto going into next season, because Sweeney mentioned it in his end of season press conference when talking about what he would be looking for in a new coach. That was one of the things he highlighted. He included that term in his statement after announcing Sturm's hire. And then by my count, Don Sweeney, in like the first 15 minutes of the press conference yesterday, said evolve offensively 3 times. It is clearly like a priority, but they haven't really explained what that means or what they expect that to look like. So I asked Sturm, not necessarily right away, but when you get this team playing the way you want them to play, what does that offense look like? And you're right, like he wasn't going to go into the X's and O's of everything of how it looks. But there were a couple, I'm not going to read the full answer because it was a pretty long answer, but a couple things that stood out. Talking about how his offense isn't just about the offensive zone, which we know. It all starts D zone. It's how you get through the neutral zone. He talked a lot about that, about how you get to the offensive zone and get to scoring chances. So it seems like transition play is going to be a big emphasis. But he says coming out with the puck, sounds like they want to exit the D zone with possession, which I will just say quickly, like, I agree. Ideally, that's what you want to do. We've talked about this before. There are times where you have to be willing to just flip it out to the neutral zone. But he started there. We want to have the puck more. He says, we got to have better entries, not turn pucks over. I think that part was a big issue last season, which he's right about. Obviously, we saw that. He says we got to be more hungry, have a better mindset. Want him to have an offensive mindset and the mentality that when we have the puck, we want to play with pace, with and without the puck. Not just think the game fast, but play the game fast. And he ended by saying it's not going to happen overnight, but that's something I will address right away. So to me, like the keys you pick up there are exiting the D zone with possession, getting through the neutral zone with pace, and playing fast, which the Bruins have wanted to do for a couple years now, and for I would say several different reasons, not been able to. Like they've been a slow team, and I'll go back to last year where, after the 23-24 season, Cam Neely says they have to get faster. And then they make roster moves that made them slower. And it was like something happened last offseason where they instead focused more on size and physicality. And it blew up in their face because they ended up with a team that was big and could be physical at times, but ultimately wasn't good enough. So now I wonder, like, okay, this offseason, they keep talking about playing with pace and they keep talking about transition. Are they actually going to get guys who are going to help with that? Or is something going to change again between now and July 1st where they end up going big and heavy again in the offseason? Like, they can keep talking about wanting to play this way, but now you got to get the personnel to actually do it. And maybe some of that started at the deadline. Maybe Casey Middlestat is part of that. Whatever his other faults, he is a very good skater and can transport the puck. But are they going to identify other guys to help with that? Because it seems like that's how Marco Sturm wants to play. And I would say he certainly does not have the personnel right now to do that really effectively.
Yeah. And he mentioned the need for a top six guy. Like he talked about a little bit about the gap in the roster that, though he did say he likes what the roster looks like already, just that's kind of the one area they need to fill. And that means, if he wants that style of play, that gap is going to preferably be filled with someone who's fast and moves the puck fast and thinks fast. Which, maybe Mitch Marner. I don't know. You have to think about who out there might fit into that description as well. And the other thing that Sweeney talked about, it was actually Sweeney who mentioned it, but it's going to be an emphasis for Sturm as he takes over. Specifically with the power play, Sweeney mentioned many times it was the entries. Like he was talking about how bad their zone entries were on the power play, killed their power play. So expect that to be an emphasis as well.
Now, I want to get to something as well that is worth mentioning because the process, the hiring process, Don Sweeney mentioned they spoke to at least 14 names in a variety of ways, some more serious than others, but he did touch on the eye-opening experience of hearing from candidates around the league about their honest, blunt assessments of what Boston needs to do better. I think there's a little bit of humble pie there, and I think that's important for the Bruins because humility is very important in life. And obviously, fans and media, we're very, very, very quick to point out flaws when we see them, and I don't know, there could be a tendency for management to shoo that off because what do we know? We're not walking a day in their shoes. But when you have peers around the league that are in their industry that are telling them one thing, multiple things, I think there's some more weight there, and right or wrong. And it seems like management kind of took one on the chin and maybe have woken up a little bit in a sense to evolve and change and just maybe not be know-it-alls. I'm not saying that that's how they view themselves, but how did you guys take those comments from Don?
Yeah, the quote was, it was a very informative search for me personally, a very pivotal moment for the franchise. So, like, it did sound like maybe one of the questions that management asked the coaching hires, like, what would you change about, how we operate as management or just as an organization in total. And they, people gave their honest answers. And
I don't think it was so much that, like, Don Sweeney wouldn't be asking coaching candidates about management and ownership type stuff. I took it
I
to
think
mean
he was
about
asking a
their
question about like the relationship between that, or I don't think it would have been off the table.
I well, I mean, I guess I took it to mean about their style of play and the roster and like the stuff that a coach controls. But I mean, it's possible. Like, obviously, we weren't in there, so we don't know everything they talked about. But I took it to mean more of that. Yeah, and even before that part of the quote, Sweeney said the process in that sense, it can be uncomfortable in terms of the critical eye that other people are watching your team and breaking down your team and the changes they want to make. You have to be open to all of it. You have to understand that the position we're in, we didn't execute both at the management level and the coaching level and the player level. So we have to be open to that and the tweaks that coaches want to make. Um, he also said like he was glad that the candidates they talked to basically were honest with him and didn't try to sugarcoat it or didn't try to like suck up to Sweeney and say like, oh yeah, like you've done a great job and I would just be so happy to come in and work with whatever you give me. Like Sweeney said it himself, like that wouldn't have been productive because they've made mistakes. Um, so yeah, it can be eye opening and it can force you to change or open your eyes to stuff that maybe you got stuck with like tunnel vision on where you're like, well, this is how we do things and this is what our staff here in this building, wants to do. And then you see something or hear something from an outside perspective and it's like, oh yeah, like man, people really are kind of looking at us differently now than they might have a few years ago where a few years ago we were the envy of the league and everyone wanted to play like us. And now we have these candidates coming in telling us like the way you played last year isn't how the league plays now. And, here's where we have to change if we're gonna get to a more competitive level. So um yeah, I, I think that's yes, I think this management team like needed to be humble to an extent and honestly already was. Like I know a lot of fans won't want to acknowledge that, but when you have to sell at the deadline after having a big off season where you spent a lot of money, that in and of itself is pretty humbling. Like when the team that you poured a lot of money into turns into a seller at the deadline and bottoms out into a top 5 pick. I mean, unless you're like the most arrogant human being in history, you're going to be pretty humbled by that experience.
I agree. I think they absolutely were, and I think they were humbled long before that because they didn't decide to sell on deadline day. But I do think that some of their defense mechanisms on breakup day or the postseason press availability, I think that kind of reignited some fuel to fans about, man, these guys they just can't take one on the chin, can they? And I think that I don't think that day helped their cause, but I agree with you, Scott. I think they've been humbled certainly um, over the last calendar year at a few different points.
Yeah, well, it was a tough pill to swallow. They're competitive, right? Sweeney and Neely, at the end of the day, they're like the players. They are always wanting to win, and then when you have to acknowledge that you have to do something against that, which is selling, that was an acceptance that they had to come to at some point right before the deadline, and it certainly wasn't easy for them to decide to do that. But Brian, I did want to one last thing about the 14 coaches is it kind of sounds like they got free like 14 free consultations of what the hell is wrong and what do you change, like just a
Well,
little bit of extra consulting about what to do.
and maybe that was strategic by them. I know people were asking what's taking so long. Maybe the Bruins recognized, hey, in addition to vetting Sturm as long as we need to and making sure he's the right guy and crossing our T's and dotting our I's, maybe there's some benefit to an elongated coaching search because we do get the opportunity to get some feedback, which is helpful. I'm not going to dismiss that possibility. Bridgette, I know what you were about to get to, and we'll get
Yeah,
to that in just one
your
second.
opening shift.
Yeah. Before we get to that, I just want to mention something I saw late last night. One of our off-season exercise might be disrupted. I don't know if you guys saw this, but Frank Saravelli is reporting that there's some smoke to Chris Kreider being potentially traded to the Anaheim Ducks. Now, Chris Kreider, I believe his cap hit is it 6.5 million or something like that. But
That's
the Rangers have around 8 million in change in cap space heading into this free agency period, and they have RFAs Keandre Miller, who's also rumored to be in, potentially being moved, but also Will Cooley. And it's really difficult for them to re-sign both of them at what they're expected to make, which is why it made them vulnerable to somebody offer sheeting Will Cooley and being successful, or Keandre Miller. I will just say that
Keandre Miller's name has popped up in a lot of trade rumors recently.
Yeah, but let's assume that he stuck around, right? Moving Kreider's contract, it makes the Rangers far less vulnerable to not being able to match an offer sheet for Will Cooley. So I think that I don't think he's leaving New York if I were to guess right now. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Maybe you guys have a comment on that.
No, I agree. Like that's clear. That clearly seems to be what the angle is here: is dump Kreider, so you have the money to sign Cooley. They're both wingers, not identical kind of players, but similar in terms of bigger bodies. Yeah, certainly seems like one is done so you can prioritize the other. And you're right. Like the whole idea, like when I brought up Will Cooley, the whole idea behind targeting him is the Rangers are up against the cap and have to make some tough decisions. And maybe you can entice them to have one of those tough decisions be to trade away Cooley for a second round pick. So they're not losing someone for nothing. So if they now are going to have more cap space to work with, then yes, they are better equipped to match an offer sheet, to not take it unless you really blow them away, which as much as I like Cooley, I don't know if he's a guy that you're going to like $5-6 million for. Like he's not, he could end up being worth that, but he hasn't proven that yet. So there would be a lot of risk there if you were to go, a whole lot higher than I think where we wanted to go, which was more in like the $4 million range. So, yeah, it's again, it comes back to like it's tough to add impact 20 something forwards. Like a lot of free agents are older, restricted free agents. Yes, you can offer sheet, but you either have to go above and beyond to make it worth their current team's time, or you need them to be in cap jail, which unfortunately for you, there just aren't going to be as many teams in cap jail now because the cap is going up. The St. Louis Blues last year struck at the perfect time with the Oilers, who were up against the cap in a year where the cap did not go up. So they were extra vulnerable because there's no extra money getting added to their books to keep those guys. Unfortunately, teams do have extra money now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Bridgette, I'm going to cue you up here, but we've talked a lot about the upcoming draft, prospects that we like, who realistically we think the Bruins might end up having a choice between, and all still very valid and tons of merit there. And but we've also talked about the possibility of utilizing that pick as an asset for a more young, NHL proven top 6, top 3 talent, or top line talent if they could. So we've touched on it. The Bruins are entering a rebuild, retool on the fly. We'll see which one that ends up being. It's all well and good. They're entering a rebuild, retool, pick number 7, right? Well, not so fast. Their 2 franchise players are 29 and 28. McAvoy turns 28 in December. So it's not like they're in their earlier mid-20s where you can exercise some more patience. This means it's not the best time to exercise patience for a 3 to 5 year rebuild when you're talking about the prime years of some of your top 2 players. So with that said, the Bruins may very well draft 7th overall. And as Bridgette reads this quote, I just want you to ask yourselves, is there also a chance that pick gets moved or subsequent picks in different rounds in different years?
Yeah, Brian, I don't think you're the only person that this answer perked their interest, because uh, it was kind of not the direction I thought that this answer was going to go. So, Sweeney was asked about if Sturm would have any involvement in drafting. And I think the question was more like, hey, are you going to pick someone that's his style? But instead, he looked at Sturm and he was like, most coaches would tell you they'd rather you trade that pick so they could be good now. And then this is the quote. He says, we're in a unique position this year, drafting in the top 10, that we haven't been there for a significant amount of time. We're excited about that. We have 2 second-round picks. We have 2 firsts the following year, another 2 firsts. We've been an aggressive organization, whether you want to point out fault in regard to us trying to win and accomplish the ultimate goal. That's what we're here for. So we will use our draft capital and try to improve our hockey club this year, moving forward in every capacity possible. It might be making the selection, but it won't mean that we aren't having conversations to say, hey, how do we improve our hockey club today and moving forward?
In every capacity, and it might mean making the selection. Scott, does that verbiage sound definitive to you that they are absolutely going to be drafting 7th overall if something comes across their table that's worthwhile?
Nope, it does not. Nor would I expect Don Sweeney to sound definitive less than 3 weeks from the draft, because you want to leave every option open. And do I think they're going to trade the 7th overall pick? No, I don't. I think they're going to hold on to it and make the pick. But should you be open to getting blown away if someone is interested in that pick and has that kind of impact 20-something roster player who can be part of who can make a difference now and for years to come? Yeah, of course you should be open to that. I am very skeptical of whether that's going to happen in this draft. We've heard all about how it's, a weaker draft compared to a lot of years. Although there are some people who push back on that and don't actually see it that way. So that's where it opens you up to, like, well, what if the Bruins are one of the teams who thinks, if they're being honest to themselves behind closed doors, yeah, this is a little weaker, and if honestly we don't know if there's going to be a player there at 7 that we absolutely love. And what if some other team says, you know what, if Jake O'Brien or Caleb Denwaier or Brady Martin falls to 7 or Roger McQueen's there, we love 1 or 2 or 3 of those guys, and we have this forward that, we don't know if we're going to re-sign long term or whatever the situation might be. Like, yeah, now that becomes something that might make sense for both teams. And we don't know, like, where the Bruins are on the players in that range. We know what Don Sweeney told us after the lottery. He said, we're confident there will still be a good player available to us there. Well, of course he's going to say that. Yeah. You're not going to want to tell fans, like, yeah, we're going to pick someone who we think is going to suck, or, we think it's only going to be a third liner. Like, no, like, you want fans to be excited. You want other teams to believe that you really value that pick no matter what. And maybe they do. Maybe this is just Sweeney leaving doors open to be ambiguous and to not box himself into anything. And maybe behind closed doors, maybe they actually love these guys. Maybe they're like, you know what? We have 8 or 9 players on this draft that we love, and whoever falls to us at 7, we're going to be totally comfortable taking. Like, all of that is possible. And maybe as we get closer to the draft, we'll get a better feel for how the Bruins actually feel about this. But right now, and they're not the only team doing this, but every team in that top of that draft is putting out smoke, is trying to misdirect and not let any of their competitors in on exactly what it is that they're thinking about doing.
So what keeps coming back into my mind, because of course there's a possibility that a draft pick just doesn't pan out. Though I will say, drafting in the top 10, I'm fairly confident that all of these kids will end up being certainly top 4 defensemen or top 9 forwards, if not top 6 forwards on their NHL teams in time. But it's that last sentence that I just said that has me curious, because if they draft Jake O'Brien or Caleb Denwyer or Brady Martin or Roger McQueen or hell, even James Higgins, like Anton Frondell, they could draft one of these players, and they might end up being amazing. But what if that's not until 2029? Right? Maybe they don't make their NHL debut for 2 or 3 years from now, and then it takes another 2 or 3 years to really hit their stride in the league. And now Pastrnak and McAvoy are in their early mid-30s, which is still fine, right? Like, you're still serviceable and very good at that age, but there's going to come a day where McAvoy and Pastrnak are no longer around or at the levels that they are now. And while you might have a great draft pick from 2025, now you're without those guys, and I need to replace those guys in time. So, if the Bruins, we've talked about Elias Pettersson mainly because of the rumors about him maybe not being a fit in Vancouver, and Vancouver maybe even heading towards a rebuild in time. But there's other players too that are rumored to be unhappy where they are that would fit that mold for Boston. For example, would you rather draft Jake O'Brien, who could end up being a great player? And you guys know, like, I've been very high on him, right? I think he's going to be a good player in the NHL. But if that's not until 2028, 2029, when you're trying to maximize the current window of your star players, your best players, would you rather draft O'Brien now and have him pan out in 2, 3, 4 years, or would you rather maybe try to capitalize on Marty Necas, who wasn't rumored to be happy in Colorado? Now he's a UFA at the end of next season, so you ideally want to have an extension in place or something like that. But if you could bring in a Marty Necas, we talked about Pettersson, but there's Marty Necas, there's other players like that could align with the careers of your top players right now. It's just something to think about. And Scott, I agree. I think Sweeney's playing the game. I think he's saying what he's saying on purpose to make himself seem open for business, but also optimistic about what they have. You don't want to come across desperate. But I think it's something that you really have to consider, because for me, it's not so much will the player be a bust or will they be great. It's about when will they be great. Because if it's in 4 or 5 years, yeah, Pastrnak and McAvoy will still be under contract. But again, they're in their prime, and you can't overlook that. So you can still win with a developed prospect that you drafted in 2025 and then aging McAvoy and Pastrnak, right? Like, they went to a cup finals with Bergeron, who was in his, late 30s. Marchand was in his, Bergeron was in his mid 30s. Marchand, I think, was in his like early 30s. Chara was approaching 40. Like, you can still have an older core. I'm just saying it's about, if you're trying to maximize the window, it's something that the Bruins, I'm sure, are considering if the right deal came across their table.
Yeah, the part of the statement that the quote that I read that maybe, I guess, points to what he would like to do. He said, "We've been an aggressive organization, whether or not you want to point out a fault in that." Basically, people referring to when people thought that he's used too much draft capital, probably the year that they went out at the deadline and got Bertuzzi and Orlov, and when they went all in on the best regular season team in the history of the league. Basically, he's saying, I have a history of being aggressive. I'm open to an aggressive move that is involving my first round pick this year. And he also brought up the first and second round picks the years to come. So, hey, maybe it's moving maybe it's not moving the 7 overall. Maybe it's moving a first round pick in an upcoming season.
Yeah, because I think there's also, for as much as they've been aggressive before and they're going to be open to being aggressive again, yeah, their draft capital goes well beyond the 7th overall pick this year. As Sweeney referenced, as you just referenced, Bridgette, like, they have 4 more first round picks coming in the next couple drafts and a bunch of second round picks in there, including 2 this year. So there's other picks they can trade away, whether that's now or at the deadline or next summer. That they have more to work with now. I will say, like, and I've said this before, you do also need to legitimately replenish your prospect pool. Like,
Mhm.
I know you don't want this to be a 5 or 6 year project, but the Bruins will not win a Stanley Cup without young players making an impact and being a part of it. It's just how you have to build a roster in a salary cap league. You can't have every move you make be trading for or signing, trading for guys in their prime years on prime contracts or signing guys as unrestricted free agents. There's a salary cap. You just can't afford to do that. Like, okay, if you trade for someone in their mid 20s now who's making $6 million a year, well, that's one less player you can sign this off season. So you've still probably ended up adding the same amount of talent to your lineup in the short term. At some point, you need young players on cheap contracts to make a real impact. And this 7th overall pick is the best chance you've had in a while to
Mm.
really land that kind of player who can develop into a legitimate top 6 guy. So I'd be very careful about
Mm.
who I traded for, what I even consider, because we have the number one center conversation too. Like, yeah, if it's Elias Pettersson, then we're having a different conversation because that is a number one center. Whatever else you think of his faults and how much you love him or not. But short of that, you're one of your best chances of getting a number one center remains this pick, even though we're not projecting all these guys to be bona fide number one centers. Maybe it's more likely they're all number 2 centers, but a decent chunk of these centers we're talking about at least have the potential to become that. And you have to play some lottery tickets at some point. Like, you have to take
Yeah.
some chances.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You have to win with young drafted talent. Uh, I think that the reason we or I bring up the number 7 overall pick is because it's the most enticing draft pick that the Bruins have as an asset, because their future first, nobody knows where that would fall. Is that a late first? Is it a mid first? Is it, high first? Like, so if there's a world where the Bruins keep number 7 overall and strike a deal for a high end talent for their roster by using other collateral, draft capital, sure, there's risks that for example, let's say they traded one of their first round picks in 2026, which is touted to be a much better, deeper draft than this year. And that pick ends up becoming, a player that you can look back and say, oh my God, the Bruins traded that pick away. They should have traded number 7 in 2025. Like, you can play that game, but you're right. Like, they are drafting top 10 this year. And I think if you can draft top 10 this year, number 7 overall, and find a way to bring in a young NHL proven player that can help the roster now in a top 6 role, I think that's obviously best case scenario. You guys are absolutely right to bring up, hey, it's not just number 7 that's on the table here. It could be, like we said, subsequent years, subsequent rounds. So it's all on the table. And I really would not like to see the Bruins trade their number 7 overall pick for all the reasons Scott said. I really want them to take that selection. But again, like I said, the Bruins are in a tough spot right now where their retool is coinciding with the primes of their top players, and it's not an ideal time. The timing sucks. So they have to be worried about their future. Absolutely. They also have to be worried about their present, because their present matters. And if you trade, let's say you do trade number 7 overall for an Elias Pettersson or Marty Natchez or something like that, that doesn't mean that they can't hit on their second round picks this year or their first next year that end up being those players that Scott's talking about that you end up winning with. So I just think there's so many different ways that this can go. I'm very fascinated to see it all play out, and it's really tough to like be so adamant about one side of the aisle versus the other when they're just in a tough spot. They're kind because of the stage of McAvoy and Pasternak's career, they should be in more of a win now mode, but of course they're in more of a rebuild, retool mode. So it's just a conflict of interest right now. But they can do it all if they're creative enough and smart enough and they draft and develop well and they make the right trades. Like there is a way to do this. It's just going to be difficult.
Well, yeah, I mean, think about what they gave up to get some of those picks. Like they gave up Brendan Carlo. They gave up guys that would have helped, right now. If they had done what we maybe thought they were going to do, which was like do a conservative sell where you like maybe trade Frederick, but keep guys like Coyle and Carlo and Marchand. But now you have these picks, so you have to find out, the best way to use them, because otherwise those trades, you want to come out the winner of those trades. And at the end of the day, draft picks are just currency. So those organizations might not have been able to give you a player in return that you like, but you now can go use that currency to offer to other teams and get a player now, after those guys have walked out the door, like Carlo. And obviously now we know Marchand is going to be a first round pick in return for him. So.
Yeah. And last thing I would point out here is, like, as much as we talk about you don't want to waste Pastrnak and McAvoy's primes, you can still be a little bit patient here. They are, they're signed for a long time. McAvoy through 2030, Pastrnak through 2031. As of now, we have not heard anything about either one of them being unhappy or even considering wanting out. Yes, there is a danger if this takes too long that they might get there. But for now, it's like those guys know what happened last year and see what the roster is now. And as much as they want to be right back at it, I think they are also smart enough to understand, like, some patience is going to be required. For them, it's not going to be 5 years, but like it could be 2, right? Like I think if you really got Pastrnak and McAvoy in an honest moment, they would tell you they're not going into this season expecting to be a true Stanley Cup contender. Like, I know players have to think that and want to approach it like that, but I also think those guys see what's happening. So, can you make a playoff push this year and then take a jump the following year? Like, that's kind of always what we've laid out as sort of the ideal scenario, right? The Capitals model. Now, as it turns out, as great as they were in the regular season, they were not yet a cup contender, but they at least had a season that makes them feel like they are heading in the right direction. And I think if you can take those steps over these next couple years and Pastrnak and McAvoy feel like they're going in the right direction, then that's okay. Like, you don't have to go all in now. And by the way, if that's the process, then this 7th overall pick, he might be ready to make the team next season. Not 25-26, but the 26-27 season. And he might be an impactful player by 27-28. And now all of a sudden they're like, hey, you know what? Thank God we made that pick. Like, this kid's coming up and like he's now part of the the pillars of the team, and this is great. Like, we're glad we have him.
It's all possible. That kid can make the team this fall, depending on who it is. There are probably 2 or 3 prospects that many scouts or analysts could say, yeah, I could see them cracking a roster in the fall. Right now 2 or 3 prospects out of an entire draft class is not a high percentage, but let's say hypothetically Anton Frondel fell, right? Well, he is a physically mature prospect, played against older players over in Sweden, and could see him being a more NHL ready prospect despite him falling to 7. Roger McQueen, whether you want the Bruins to be in on him or not, he tested well physically, one of the bigger, more mature players in the draft. Could see him making a team out of camp potentially. So when I say that this player might not be ready, even if he does hit, for another, 3 or 4 or 5 years. I'm admittedly playing devil's advocate because I'm trying to show all the angles that the Bruins have to think of right now. But of course, the other side of that is, yes, this player could be ready this fall. This player could be ready next season. And absolutely, Scott, I think Pasternak and McAvoy, if they're a bubble playoff team, or they're making the playoffs the next couple of years, but they're getting bounced early, like, okay, that's the cost of having a long NHL career. Some guys never win the cup, and if they do, maybe it's not until later in their career. So, but they're not going to be happy if they are a basement dweller for a couple of years here. And I know that you acknowledge that as well. So they just need to be, yeah, like they can exercise patience, but to your point, it has to be with forward progress. And if they draft 7 overall, or their next couple of draft picks, aren't in the league for a few years, and they don't really address the roster adequately enough, then they are at risk for, even if they're healthier, still being a bottom 10 team in the league. So again, it's not just the 7th overall pick this year that the Bruins could use. They could use that selection, get that person in the system, and still, use a combination of other picks or a pick to maybe help another hockey trade. So it's all on the table. And I'm just curious to see how it plays out.
If it's a guy that's going to play college hockey, say after he gets drafted, the decision is going to go play in the NCAA. A lot of those guys that are top 10 picks that play college hockey will play a full freshman season, and they'll play their full sophomore season. But as soon as their team gets knocked out of the playoffs, a lot of them join their NHL teams. And that's what happened with Ryan Leonard. He was an 8th overall pick a few years ago. So you could see that, technically they wouldn't be there next year, but they might even be able to join you partway through the following season if their college season ends in March and they seem like they're ready and they come join your team in the spring. That's a possibility for college guys. That's a common thing for college guys to do.
Yeah, well, I think you're gonna see more one and dones with the new CHL NCAA rules, where there's going to be more, like, especially picking in this range, there's going to be guys picked who go play 1 year of college hockey as, an 18-year-old freshman, and 18, 19-year-old freshman, and then turn pro at the end of one season. Like, if, like, Porter Martone's a name that has popped up a lot, and as someone who might play college hockey next season after getting drafted high this year. Porter Martone is 6'3", 208. Like, I don't think he's going to need 2 years of college hockey. He's probably going to go somewhere 1 year and sign as soon as the season's over. And there might be a couple guys like that in this draft.
It is more common to see them do that after their sophomore year, though. Just saying, like
I know, but we're talking about different caliber players now. Like these guys coming over from the CHL are much better prepared and like much more highly touted than a lot of the 18-year-olds coming into college from the USHL, for example. Like they're a little further along, and Jackson Smith is an elite talent. Like if Matthew Schaefer plays college hockey next year, he's an elite talent. I just think you're going to see a lot more guys who don't need 2 years of college hockey.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Macklin Celebrini was the guy who was one and done, and that's because he was the highest end player. So yes, those really, really high end, young, talented players that go in the top 10 in the draft.
And these guys are a year further along than Macklin Celebrini was.
Yeah, because
Celebrini was a 17-year-old, not turning 18 until after his freshman year of college. Like these guys are going to be 18 starting, turning 19 during the year.
Yeah. Hey, I just hope that they go to college somewhere near us so that we can watch them and maybe I can.
I know we got to start getting more of these guys to BU and BC, because right now a lot of them are committing to Big Ten schools because they have the most money. They have even more to work with than BU and BC do. So you're seeing a lot of Penn State, Michigan State, Michigan.
I saw a graphic that had BU's logo as one of 6 or 7 potential recruiters for Gavin McKenna. So
yeah, now that and this is kind of something that bothers a lot of people, but now that colleges can give money to players, guys are going to schools that are like, it is a contract. Like they're going to the schools that are offering them the most money. And I'm not talking about scholarship money. I'm talking about real money. That's just what's happening now. People don't maybe even know that, but as of last year, that's been it's been going on, and it kind of does change the balance of college hockey and college sports in general. This is basketball big time. It has been changing. You can entice the best players to your team by just being like, yeah, we're going to give you X million dollars to come play here. And it's never, I don't think they have to report it ever. So you just hear about it behind the scenes, what the numbers are. But yes, it's not going to be a coincidence that the best players end up going to the same schools. And it's not just because, oh, they want to play with other good players. No, it's because those schools are offering them more money.
So I just want to leave you guys with this, and just to kind of wrap up the comments and the quote that Bridgette read about Don Sweeney and all their draft capital. In the wake of last year's trade deadline, we know the Bruins acquired prospect Will Zellers from Colorado in the Charlie Coyle trade. He's going to North Dakota next season, speaking of college hockey, so we'll see how he does. Obviously, Fraser Minton came over from Toronto. He's more of an NHL-ready prospect, and we expect him to push for a job next year full-time with the Bruins. But as far as picks go, following last year's trade deadline, and after they got a 4th-round pick in the Frederick trade to Edmonton, but they used that for Yoki Haru. So I've calculated that, and I've omitted that. So including picks that Boston acquired from last year's trade deadline, in addition to their own, they now have 5 first-round draft picks, 4 second-round draft picks, 2 third-round draft picks, 3 fourth-round draft picks, 2 fifth-round draft picks, 3 sixth-round draft picks, and 3 seventh-round draft picks, for a total of 22 draft picks over the next 3 drafts. So this just illustrates, like, we spent some time talking about the 7th pick this year because it's right now it's their most coveted draft pick. But when you hear that, which of those rounds, which of those years would you, as Bruins fans, Bruins media, be like comfortable with Boston partying for the right deal? Because I can promise you guys that I don't think the Bruins are going to select all 22 of those picks. And if we're talking about first and second round picks, they have 9 first and second round picks in the next 3 years. That's where the money is made. So that's where you really want to look at.
I think, that's the even more important number, because those are the ones that have value. Those are the ones that actually get you something.
So if it's not 7, if it's not number 7 this year, right? Like what combination of those would fans, listeners, you guys, like, what would you be comfortable with? Because I think it's inevitable. I think something's going to go, right? Whether it's an offer sheet, like this collateral, this draft capital. Again, I'm all cool. I would love for them to pick 7th overall this year, right? But after that, I do think we have to be willing to part with. You have to be willing to give to get, right? So if we want the Bruins to get better, it's going to have to come at the expense of maybe sending away a young prospect we don't want them to trade away. Maybe it means trading away Mason Lohrei in a package, or a Matt Poitras, or a draft pick that we don't want them to move, but you kind of have to. It's part of the cost of doing business. So I think that it's inevitable. I just don't know which one of these picks and years Boston will ultimately part with. But it won't be like, I don't think it'll be trade deadline stuff. It's going to have to be like, because they're not going to be in a position really to be like buyers, I don't think, right, at next year's deadline. So it's going to probably be outside of trade deadlines for the most part.
Well, right away, I would say look at the picks that are not their own, because there's extra value in keeping your own picks, because it allows offer sheets to be a possibility. In order to offer sheet players, you have to have your own draft picks. So their 2 second round picks this year are not their own. They're Carolina's and St. Louis's. Those could be on the table. One of their first round picks next year is Toronto's. One of the ones the following year in 27 is Florida's. So keep an eye on those. I would say those are the ones the Bruins would, if they're going to trade any in the first 2 rounds, that they would most, quote unquote, want to trade. Because 1, it allows them to keep their own picks, leave offer sheets as an option. And 2, their own picks are going to be better picks than those. Like, obviously we already know the order for this year, and those second round picks land them mid to late second round in both cases. But even next year, like, even though Toronto is going to make some pretty significant changes this offseason, I would expect Toronto to be better than Boston next year. And I would certainly expect Florida to be better than Boston the year after that. So I think they would prefer to trade picks that are not their own.
Yeah, I think
That's a great distinction, Scott. Yeah.
Yep.
Well said.
Wonder what
all right.
if they trade the Marchand pick. I wonder what they'd get. Like, then you have to really follow like this map of like
they're
they're
gonna pull a Belichick. Like, do you guys? I don't know if you guys have ever looked at the Jimmy Garoppolo trade tree, but they traded Jimmy Garoppolo for a second round pick, and everyone was like, "That's all they got is a second round pick." And then like Belichick traded that for like 2 4ths, and then that for like 2 5ths and 2 6ths, and like it just kept like snowballing. So it's like, yeah, you know what? You're never even going to be able to track who they actually got for Jimmy Garoppolo, because now it's like 7 different picks and they've all been moved in different trades.
Yes. Yeah. Let's hope it's not that.
Like the Cam Neely trade tree is like still paying off. Like the Bruins still have direct lines from the trade that brought Cam Neely to Boston. Like, I don't have it up, so I'm not going to go through it all, but you can trace it like all the way through current day. It's crazy.
All right. Well, do you two have anything else you wanted to get to on this episode before we sign out?
I do not. Another long layup in the Stanley Cup final. I know why it happens, but it's just like annoying that like we don't have another game until Thursday night. Especially because they're in the same city. Like there's not even travel, and yet we have a Monday through Thursday gap. So,
yeah.
At some point we do still have to have like probably talk a little more in depth about Marchand. So maybe later this week or early next week.
Yeah, I think later this week presents that opportunity, because we'll have at least one more game to talk about, and obviously Game 3 was a blowout on a scoreboard. So hopefully Edmonton can bounce back, because if they drop Game 4, I know they came back last year, but 4-7, but I don't know. They don't. It wouldn't be wise to lose to go down 3-1 to the Florida Panthers this year. So yeah, plenty to talk about there. Trent Frederick still, boy, man, he just doesn't like the Panthers, but they're too good. They're too good to let him get to them.
His biggest fan is Wayne Gretzky. I don't know if you watched the pregame of the last game, and also the intermission in Game 1. Gretzky was like, "Oh, Frederick's scoring the game winner," and then like pre-game of last game, he was like, "I feel like Frederick's going to make a big impact." And I'm like, he's unpromptedly brought up Trent Frederick so many times. I just think it's the funniest thing, because you have the best player ever talking about Trent Frederick. Like, this is going to be the guy who does it. And obviously Wayne is rooting for the Oilers, but so he's like really like bought into this whole Frederick thing. I like it. I think it's great.
I mean, there's been some reporting recently about Edmonton trying to extend Frederick, which is interesting because I feel like they have other clear priorities to get done this offseason, like Evan Bouchard. So I think our friend DJ Bean tweeted like the Oilers have to be careful with this one. DJ has obviously become a big Oilers fan, but yeah, I mean, they do. Like it's kind of the same thing like as where the Bruins were, where it's like, yeah, sure, you'd like to keep Frederick around, but got to be careful with like how much money that's actually going to cost, because he has not produced a ton. And even like the more physical side of it, like we saw it here, it's not like it's there all the time. When it is there, you love it, but like he can go in and out sometimes.
I mean, how impactful is, even when he's on his game physically, how many forechecks did he ever really disrupt? The physicality that you're referencing, Scott, is more like the between the whistles, or just, he was never one to have a game-changing open ice hit like we've seen Charlie McAvoy have over the years. And he certainly is not Sam Bennett on the forecheck, even at his best.
I was gonna say like that shift Sam Bennett had in Game 3.
Oh my God, incredible!
Huge hit at the blue line, another hit on the boards, and then finishes on a breakaway.
Another $5 million rising in his stock.
Yeah.
But
Gonna be the
yeah.
highest paid player in NHL history by the end of the series.
So is Marchand. Both of their numbers have gone up.
Hey,
I mean, listen, I guess like if you're anti-Panthers, that's good news. Like if these guys actually want to cash in, then Aaron Ekblad too. I think maybe a little more under the radar, but another guy I think who's helping his stock. I mean, landed a huge hit on Connor McDavid that shook up McDavid last game. Like, if those guys' numbers are all going up because of this run, and they all want to cash in and not take a hometown discount, then it's possible Florida can only keep one of them. So that would be good news for everyone chasing Florida.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Bridgette, Scott, thanks for your time. Everybody else, thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you later in the week. Hey, guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.